Hello, everybody. Thanks for giving me the chance to share my views to you all. I hope that my sharing could be fruitful to you, and also I look forward to hearing feedback, particularly questions and comments from the audience, which will definitely be productive and important for the development of community development as a profession. Honorary Chair, members of the organizing committee, President of the IACD, friends, and our dearest participants, who are the hope and the future of community development. Million thanks for providing me this opportunity to share my views on the present theme, community development and resilience. I have been working in the community development field in Hong Kong for more than 10 years before joining different universities for another 20 more years. I'm now working with the Department of Social Work of the Hong Kong Baptist University. For those who are not familiar with Hong Kong and the community development field here, I would like to highlight that community development in Hong Kong, as well as in some other East Asian countries, is part of social work. That's the reason why most community development professionals and educators are working with departments of social work in this part of the world. It is my pleasure to share with you the resilience of community development service within the context of social service in Hong Kong. Community development and resilience has been one of my research areas since the 2000s. The years of working as community workers in the field and teacher in tertiary education institutes has allowed me to experience directly and witness the rise, the decline, and the revitalization of community development in Hong Kong. Specifically, it refers to the marginalization of community development within the social work discipline and community development services within social services in Hong Kong and some other East Asian countries, such as Taiwan and Singapore. However, in the 2000s, the public sector and later various funders in the third sector started to actively promote community development practice through sponsoring projects and educational campaigns of various sorts. Examples of the projects include those that target at developing social capital of the disadvantaged communities to cater for their welfare needs, developing the entrepreneurial capacities of people in poverty to earn resources from the market, identifying cultural resources of the minority groups to strengthen their social integration, and launching different campaigns to promote neighborhood mutual support. There are also different initiatives of funders and business firms to fulfill their corporate social responsibilities. At the same time, there have been many community development practitioners actively utilizing consensual and conflict approaches of community development practices to facilitate capacity building of the disadvantaged communities and to promote public recognition of community development as valuable and effective in strengthening the resilience of the community against deprivation, poverty, discrimination, and inequalities. It is particularly interesting that at the same time, community development practice and services have been marginalized within the social work profession and the social service sector. As mentioned earlier, the present presentation is based on the findings of my past research studies relating to the theme of community development and resilience. The research studies that I have conducted in the past years since 2013 are focusing firstly on the constraining impact of the macro context with the influence of the neoliberalization of the public sector, on the services included to the recent concern of the agency of the community development stakeholders to further the development of the community development services in this part of the world. Examples of research on the former are shown on the slide. And these are the examples of the latter, which means those about the changing services in community development in Hong Kong. The findings relating to the current development in different parts of East Asia and during the pandemic may be brief and inconclusive, particularly for those conducted since 2019, since the social movement in Hong Kong and the outbreak of the pandemic have deprived me the opportunity to continue interviewing the relevant stakeholders. Nevertheless, I have tried my best to capture the key features which are of interest to the present presentation. Furthermore, due to limited time, I must apologize that my presentation today may be sketchy and can focus mostly on the trend and key characteristics captured. For those interested in the detailed findings and academic products, please contact me afterwards for the relating literature and reports published. Through my research studies, I noticed that not only in East Asia, but in other parts of the developed world, the influence of neoliberalization on social welfare policies has been a critical factor shaping the macro context of community development practice. By neoliberalization, following the process perspective, it refers to the mobilization of state power through the contradictory extension and reproduction of market-like rule. Under the influence of the neoliberal welfare ideology, and particularly the so-called new public management, which emphasize the significance of following the market principles like corporatization, competitive bidding, and performance measures, restructuring of the welfare sector to internalize the market principles to improve its cost effectiveness has been going on. The trend of various critical changes have been conceptualized by Peck and Theodore into different stages, including the rolling back and rolling out stages. The former is the retrenchment of the normal forms of state intervention associated with mixed economy and the Keynesian welfare national state. The latter is the rolling out of new rounds of institutional and discursive practice, which are increasingly absorbed by the challenge of managing the contradictions of state-assisted marketization itself, which involves various maneuvers by the state to support new forms of governance that are perpetually more suited to a market-driven globalizing economy. The introduction of new public management, the NPM, doctrines into the public sector is associated with the rolling out phase of neoliberalization. Community development services experienced the neoliberalized pressure similar to other social welfare services and have to cope with the resource retrenchment and marketization of service administration. Nevertheless, research studies also unravel factors like movements of decentralization in the public sector, increasing emphasis of user participation and empowerment in the professional welfare field, increasing influence of the new social movement, as well as impact of individualization and human rights. The respective influence of these so-called non-neoliberalization factors have been understudied. Echoing the recent call for delineating the respective influence of neoliberalization by scholars in the related research circle, it should be the focus of future research. Nevertheless, the research studies I have conducted have managed to reveal the concomitant impact of these contextual factors on the development of community development service in various manners. Proliferation of community development services in these countries were among the results identified. At the same time, criticism like the disadvantaged communities sharing welfare load through mutual help and various community economic initiatives were identified. Concepts like responsibilization was noted to describe such a process of disadvantaged communities shouldering the welfare responsibility shredded by the states. While community development practice have been accused for involving in popularizing the caring neoliberalism, there are examples of community development projects actively promoting the welfare of the disadvantaged communities, developing their collective capacities for tackling their difficulties, empowering service users with evidence of upward mobility noted. The resilience of community development services with the potential dangers of reinforcing the rolling out process of neoliberalization has also the potential of resisting the process and working for the welfare of the disadvantaged communities. The strategies and intervention of the NGO and practitioners are found among the critical factors leading to their different intervention and therefore different outcomes. How to resist the neoliberalizing constraint becomes the research focus of different interested scholars in recent years. Focusing on Hong Kong and the East Asian countries, neoliberalizing changes of social welfare policy have been identified. They include the need to cope with an environment of limited welfare resources for the disadvantaged communities, the emphasis on balancing the social with the economic objectives, if not mostly on the latter objectives, while planning for the welfare services. The importance of success in competitive bidding for welfare resources and the associating short-termism of the service planning and delivery. The stress on achieving the KPI, the key performance indicators, more than concerns of professional input, which are shared among Hong Kong and other East Asian countries like Taiwan and Singapore, even though their contextual differences should not be overlooked. Focusing on the public sector as an example, community development services in Hong Kong and Taiwan have solicited resources from both civil administration and social welfare. Singapore relies mostly on the social welfare ministry. For Taiwan, concerning public resources, community development services tend to rely upon the local ministry more than the social welfare counterpart when Hong Kong and Singapore witness the significant influence of the social welfare departments. Despite the contextual differences, experienced community development practitioners in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore have increasingly been tapping resources from various sectors for community mutual help, community resources development, and community capacity building in recent years. In addition, increasing emphasis on community development services in the public sector, the third sector, as well as the private for-profit sector has been unraveled. For example, the Community Investment and Inclusion Fund supporting the development of social capital of the disadvantaged communities, the Community Partnership Program supported by the Hong Kong and Shanghai banking corporations in Hong Kong, community building initiatives, as well as different community care projects in Taiwan, community support projects in different Kai Phong Community Center in Singapore are among the examples. These programs and projects, despite their differences in objectives, service nature, and contents, as well as workers' intervention methods, share common features such as facilitating community mutual help, developing capacity of the disadvantaged communities to earn economic resources and contribute to their welfare load. The potential danger of nurturing the responsibilization of disadvantaged communities to cope with the neoliberal changes is identified too. Nevertheless, similar to the situations in the developed countries outside East Asia, there are case examples identified in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore demonstrating evidence of practitioners actively fostering the welfare and empowerment of the disadvantaged communities they serve. They include small-scale community development projects as well as bigger community centers. Resembling their local counterparts, they actively solicit resources not only from the states but other foundations and community funds, expand the scope of their services to fulfill community needs, and mobilize community strength to innovate services which involve high labor cost and diligent efforts of both the practitioners and the service work and the service users. What are unique to these cases are their active involvement in advocating for policy changes for the welfare of the disadvantaged communities and facilitating their empowerment. In fact, collective empowerment has been the shared goals of these endeavors, which means that the projects are not only providing tangible or material resources, but organizing the residents to set up infrastructures in the community that can benefit people individually and collectively in the long run. Acknowledging the contextual differences, the intended goals of collective empowerment may not be identified in the written objectives of the projects, but expressed by the practitioners in interviews. These cases include community economic projects, advocacy platforms on labor rights, cross-cultural and racial community groups, campaigns on anti-discrimination and promotion of cultural integration. Nevertheless, one has to be cautious that how prevalent these projects are in East Asian countries cannot be ascertained and need further researching on. What has been evidenced is that there are cases working against the neoliberalist impact for the welfare of the disadvantaged communities. The effectiveness of these cases in countering the neoliberalist influence waits to be further researched. Another interesting phenomenon that is identified in Hong Kong and East Asian countries is the trend of forming alliance of community development practitioners in pursuing community development goals, which have been adopted by many of the so-called resisting cases identified. These alliances were formed due to various contextual factors, which include the marginalizing of community development in Hong Kong, the weakening of the professional status of social workers in Taiwan, the active promotion of committed and educators and experienced personnel in the community development field in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore, and the endeavors of specific NGOs, particularly for the case of Singapore. These alliances have actively been involved in promoting community development values and practice through the provision of in-service training for community workers, establishing sharing platforms for practitioners, mobilizing funding from various sectors for service provision for the disadvantaged, as well as bridging up community development projects with the educational institutions for resources and support beyond the field. Active sharing on the virtues and limitations of community development practice in Hong Kong, promotion of participatory community renewal model in Taiwan, and facilitation of the popularity of asset-based community development in Singapore are examples of the advocating and facilitating endeavors of these alliances. The existence of these alliances has the potential of facilitating community development practice to capture the current resilience context for community development service in Hong Kong and other East Asian countries. Nevertheless, its effectiveness waits for further research work in coming years. The future of community development lies in the continual efforts of all the committed parties. The success also depends on the ability of the community development practitioners and services to tackle the challenges lying ahead. Among the major ones, it is the increasing social inequalities or even social polarization of the society, which has weakened substantially the capacity of participation of the disadvantaged communities. The new welfare governance framework, which is among the results of the neoliberalist policy changes, confines the practitioners to bid for short-term projects and attend to quantitative performance measures. Insufficient funding has threatened the sustainability of community development. Focusing on the KPI, the key performance indicators, distracts practitioners from the outcome of changes in the community, but focuses only on cost and output. Networking with funders from different sectors, which is critical again for their survival, further drains the committed practitioners' energy and time. Furthermore, the recent outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic has posed health-threatening challenges for everyone, including the practitioners. Recipes for tackling these challenges from the perspectives of community development researchers and educators requires further research and joint effort between practitioners and academics in innovating practice strategies that can challenge neoliberalization. The persistent commitment and efforts of the committed parties are the prerequisites for sustaining the resilience of community development practice in the future. For this, I have high hope, which is not groundless. The recent efforts of community development practitioners in initiating online platforms for exchange of experience, developing innovative means of bridging online and offline intervention to reach out to the disadvantaged communities, advocating to bridge digital divides in cities with high penetration of ICT, and working out solutions are happening during the COVID-19 crisis. The continual resilience of community development practice in our part of the world lies in the close collaboration among people who are committed to community development. I rest my hope in us all. That's the end of my presentation. And comments and questions are welcome. Thank you.